In the sweltering heat of Virginia in 1848, the estate of the Harrow family seemed, from the outside, like any other sprawling plantation of the era. Its red brick manor rose above the surrounding fields, smoke curling from chimneys, and the rhythmic sounds of labor echoing from rows of crops where enslaved men and women worked tirelessly under the oppressive sun. Yet beneath this facade of order and prosperity lay an unsettling mystery that would confound the community for decades. The Harrow family, father, mother, children, and a small cadre of servants simply vanished without warning. One morning, neighbors reported a silence so profound it seemed unnatural, the kind that seeps into the marrow of the living, replacing the usual bustle with a heavy, ominous stillness. Horses grazed unattended in the fields, the windows of the manor staring blankly like eyes stripped of life, and the air carried an indistinct scent of smoke and decay that suggested that something horrific had transpired, though no one could say what. Those who first approached the estate described a scene both ordinary and horrifyingly abnormal. The doors were unlocked, furniture left in place, meals uneaten on tables, and personal items scattered as if the family had simply stepped outside and never returned. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, and yet something felt fundamentally wrong. Local children whispered of seeing shadows moving across the windows at night, fleeting glimpses that vanished before recognition. Slaves and laborers reported a pervasive feeling of being watched, a sensation of presence in empty hallways, and the manor seemed to hum with an energy that was at once oppressive and inexplicable. This disappearance, subtle yet absolute, challenged everything the surrounding community understood about order, law, and mortality. The Harrow family's history itself was a tangled web of power, secrecy, and tension. The patriarch, William Harrow, was known for his stern, calculating nature and his insistence on maintaining absolute control over his estate. His wife, Eleanor, moved through the household with quiet dignity, but was rumored to hold secrets that even servants dared not speak aloud. Their children, a pair of teenagers, had begun to chafe under the rigid expectations imposed upon them, their youthful curiosity tempered by the omnipresent authority of their parents. Neighbors recalled hearing raised voices late at night, though the specifics of those arguments were never revealed. Scholars later speculated that the dynamics within the Harrow household, combined with the oppressive conditions of slavery and isolation common on plantations, could create circumstances ripe for conflict and disappearance. The mystery deepened when the surrounding community attempted to investigate. Law enforcement at the time was sparse and poorly equipped for thorough inquiry, and the concept of forensic science was rudimentary at best. Search parties scoured the estate and surrounding woodlands, uncovering nothing. No tracks, no signs of violence, and no evidence of forced departure. Theories proliferated rapidly, ranging from abduction by unknown criminals to supernatural intervention, and each supposition seemed to draw more fear than clarity. Townspeople reported a palpable shift in the atmosphere surrounding the Harrow estate. Even casual visitors felt a chill, a weight pressing down upon them as if the very land itself remembered some unspoken atrocity. Adding to the unease were the accounts from enslaved individuals who remained on the property. They described a series of nights preceding the disappearance in which they heard unfamiliar noises, the faint scraping of furniture, whispered voices in corridors, and a low, persistent hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Some spoke of seeing fleeting figures standing silently in the shadows, watching, never approaching, but never disappearing entirely. While many dismissed these accounts at the time, later researchers and historians recognized that such reports often reflect the acute perception of individuals attuned to danger, fear, and social imbalance, particularly under conditions of extreme subjugation. By mid-morning of the day, they vanished. The Harrow estate had become a tableau of frozen life. Meals left in mid-preparation suggested interruption. Tools rested where they had been last used, and the garden, usually meticulously maintained, was overgrown and tangled. There was an eerie absence of sound except for the rustle of the wind through the trees, the occasional caw of a distant crow, and the faint, almost imperceptible creaking of the manor itself. Those who explored the estate described a sensation of timelessness, a suspension of natural order, and a fear that any further inquiry might provoke the unknown forces at work. Rumors flourished rapidly, with some neighbors claiming that the family had been spirited away by mysterious visitors in the dead of night, while others insisted the estate was cursed, a place where unnatural acts had left an indelible mark. The disappearance of the Harrow family became a subject of obsession. Travelers, lawmen, and curious onlookers arrived in Virginia, hoping to uncover the truth behind the silence that had settled over the plantation. Yet every investigation, no matter how thorough, returned the same result: an absence of evidence, a series of unanswered questions, and the pervasive feeling that the estate itself had absorbed the horror and retained it, like a wound in the landscape. The case was whispered about in town meetings, referenced in letters, and eventually documented in local newspapers as one of the most baffling events of the decade. Scholars of later generations would study these reports, analyzing the social, economic, and psychological contexts that could have contributed to such an enigmatic disappearance. By the time dusk fell, the manor loomed like a dark silhouette against the sky, its empty windows reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Those who visited described a quiet so complete it pressed against the eardrum, punctuated only by the distant sounds of wildlife that moved cautiously around the abandoned land. The disappearance remained unresolved, a puzzle that refused closure. It would haunt the imaginations of all who knew the story, a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary life could slip into uncertainty and fear, how the power dynamics, secrecy, and isolation of one household could ripple outward, affecting generations and communities in ways both tangible and spectral. The Harrow family's vanishing became more than a historical footnote. It evolved into a lens through which historians, folklorists, and cultural observers examined the interplay of human behavior, societal constraints, and environmental pressures. The mystery of their absence encouraged reflection on the nature of fear, the fragility of order, and the unseen forces that govern human interaction. Their disappearance was both a historical event and a meditation on the unknown, a story in which silence, absence, and the invisible threads of influence coalesced into an enduring enigma that would never truly be solved. Virginia in the mid-19th century was a place defined by extremes, a landscape where wealth and oppression existed side by side, and where the rhythms of daily life were governed as much by social hierarchy as by the seasons. Plantations dominated the countryside, their sprawling fields a testament to economic ambition and social status. Yet these estates were built upon the backs of enslaved laborers whose lives were bound by violence, discipline, and the constant threat of punishment. Families like the Harrows lived in relative comfort, their stately brick homes and manicured gardens symbolizing both power and order. Yet the appearance of stability masked a complex and often brutal reality. Each morning, enslaved men, women, and children would emerge before dawn, tending to fields, livestock, and domestic tasks, their labor sustaining the prosperity and status of their owners, even as their own existence was constrained by the absolute authority of the household. The Harrow estate was no exception. Agricultural output, social gatherings, and the maintenance of the manor were all carefully orchestrated, reflecting a rigid structure that left little room for deviation. Discipline within the household extended beyond physical oversight. Psychological control, expectation, and intimidation were tools as potent as any whip or punishment. Enslaved individuals were often acutely aware of the tensions and secrets that pervaded the main house, observing interactions, overhearing conversations, and noting patterns of behavior that could signal both danger and opportunity. This silent surveillance became an integral part of daily life, a coping mechanism that allowed survival within an environment governed by fear and inequality. At the same time, broader societal pressures shaped life on plantations in ways that extended far beyond the immediate household. Virginia, still a slave-holding state in 1848, was part of a complex and often contradictory social network. Plantation owners were expected to demonstrate both economic success and moral authority, while simultaneously managing the practical realities of labor, production, and security. Social gatherings, religious observances, and public appearances were all carefully curated to project an image of propriety. Even when private life was marked by discord, secrecy, or moral compromise, the tension between public perception and private reality was palpable, influencing not only the behavior of the plantation owners, but also the interpretations of neighbors, clergy, and local officials. Economic conditions further contributed to the pressures experienced by families like the Harrows. Fluctuations in crop yields, Market instability and the inherent risks of relying on enslaved labor created a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Every season brought the potential for loss of wealth, status, or life itself. These economic stresses were compounded by geographic isolation. Plantations often existed miles from the nearest town, with limited access to law enforcement, medical care, or other forms of societal support. Within this isolation, the household became both the center of authority and the site of vulnerability, a place where personal disputes could escalate unnoticed, and where unusual behavior might remain unchecked until it culminated in tragedy. Cultural norms also played a defining role in shaping behavior and expectations. Gender roles were strictly enforced, with patriarchal authority dominating family structures and social conduct closely monitored by both internal and external observers. Sons and daughters were trained to adhere to rigid codes of obedience. Marriage prospects were carefully considered in the context of property and social advantage, and deviations from expected conduct were met with disapproval, restriction, or punishment. Within this context, the Harrow family's interpersonal dynamics, marital tension, adolescent rebellion, and the private ambitions of individual family members were inseparable from the cultural framework in which they lived, a framework that demanded compliance yet fostered secrecy and concealment. Religion provided both guidance and additional pressure. Daily worship, attendance at church services, and adherence to moral teachings were outward signs of propriety, but they also underscored the potential for transgression and punishment. Clergy were influential in shaping social norms, mediating disputes, and reinforcing the authority of plantation owners, while simultaneously serving as moral observers whose judgments could impact social standing. In the eyes of the community, the behavior of the Harrow family would have been scrutinized not only for its practical implications but also for its perceived alignment with religious and moral expectations. The natural environment added another layer of complexity. Virginia's rolling hills, dense forests, and unpredictable weather created opportunities and dangers. Isolated estates were vulnerable to fire, disease, and crime, and the very land could obscure evidence of human actions. In this context, disappearances or unexplained phenomena were amplified by the isolation and the difficulty of observation, reinforcing fears and encouraging speculation. Reports of mysterious occurrences, strange sounds, or unusual behavior became magnified within the social imagination, feeding both rumor and folklore, particularly when the usual structures of authority and accountability were stretched thin. The combination of economic stress, social hierarchy, geographic isolation, and cultural expectation created a volatile environment in which human behavior could be both constrained and distorted. The Harrow family existed within this tension, their lives shaped by forces beyond their immediate control, yet also marked by private decisions, interpersonal conflict, and secrets that could not remain hidden indefinitely. Historical analysis of similar estates indicates that stress, isolation, and power imbalances often intersected to produce unusual or extreme outcomes, particularly when communication with the outside world was limited and oversight was minimal. It is within this context that the disappearance of the Harrow family must be understood. The estate, its workers, and the surrounding community formed a complex ecosystem of observation, influence, and pressure, where every action had consequence and every silence carried meaning. The combination of environmental, social, and psychological factors created conditions in which a family could vanish without immediate explanation, leaving the community to grapple with fear, rumor, and speculation. Understanding the historical backdrop of Virginia in 1848 illuminates not only the material circumstances of the Harrow family, but also the cultural and psychological landscape that made their disappearance both possible and profoundly unsettling. By situating the Harrow mystery within this broader historical, economic, and cultural framework, it becomes clear that the story is not simply one of absent bodies, but of a society structured to hide, obscure, and rationalize the extraordinary alongside the ordinary. The estate itself, its rhythms, hierarchies, and labor systems became a stage upon which human fear, power, and vulnerability played out, creating a narrative that would endure in both recorded history and the spectral imagination of Virginia's communities. The Harrow estate, seemingly ordinary in the bright Virginia sunlight, had been transformed by subtle, untraceable disturbances in the days leading up to the family's disappearance. It began with minor anomalies, almost imperceptible to the casual observer. a chair slightly askew in the parlor, the sound of footsteps echoing along the corridors when no one was present, the faint metallic scent of blood that lingered briefly in the kitchen, but had no discernible source. At first, the enslaved workers attributed these signs to fatigue, the strain of labor and heat playing tricks on their senses. But as the days progressed, the irregularities intensified, creating a pervasive sense of dread. Even the children of the household reported strange sensations, a creeping fear that seemed to settle over them in the corners of empty rooms, a quiet terror that made the familiar manor feel alien and threatening. On a humid afternoon, one of the laborers discovered a small pile of personal items belonging to the Harrow children scattered near the edge of the forest that bordered the estate. Shoes were turned over, ribbons torn, and a journal lay open with pages smeared in what appeared to be ink, though some feared it might be blood. The worker froze, sensing the presence of something unseen, a pressure in the air that made breathing feel laborious. Word of the incident reached Eleanor Harrow, who arrived at the scene with a tense calm, her face pale yet composed. She examined the items carefully, her movements deliberate, almost as if performing a ritual, yet her expression betrayed a deep, private panic. Neighbors began to notice her increasingly erratic behavior, staring into corners of rooms for long moments, murmuring to herself while walking the halls, and closing doors with a force that suggested fear rather than anger. That evening, the family gathered in the main hall for what appeared to be a routine meal. Yet even as the servants laid plates on the table, an unnatural silence enveloped the room, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floor beneath shifting feet. William Harrow seemed preoccupied, glancing repeatedly toward windows and doors, as though anticipating a presence just beyond view. A sudden sound, perhaps a branch snapping in the garden, made the youngest child startle, knocking over a candle and sending a small flame licking the edge of the polished table. Panic flickered across Eleanor's face as she swiftly extinguished it, and the tension in the room became almost tangible, pressing down on everyone present. Neighbors reported later that they could hear muffled noises, cries that seemed human but were distorted, echoing faintly across the fields, though no one could confirm their source. In the following days, the disturbances escalated. Servants began noticing objects moving on their own. A knife slid across the kitchen counter without explanation. A basin tipped over, spilling water into the dirt floor, and a heavy wooden trunk in the parlor shifted slightly when no one was near. The air seemed to vibrate with a low hum, barely audible but suffocating, and shadows stretched unnaturally along walls and ceilings. Attempts to rationalize the events faltered as each anomaly grew more inexplicable. One worker claimed to have seen a figure, translucent and dark, gliding past the hallway, disappearing into walls as if the manor itself had swallowed it. These accounts spread rapidly, fueling both fear and curiosity, and the estate became a locus of whispered speculation among neighboring plantations. A critical incident occurred near the edge of the property where the forest encroached upon the fields. A group of laborers reported hearing agonized cries and rushed to investigate, finding the ground churned as though by heavy feet and scuff marks leading toward the woods. Scattered personal effects from the Harrow children were discovered, trampled and partially buried under dirt and leaves. The workers felt eyes upon them, unseen and deliberate, and the air grew cold despite the midsummer heat. Attempts to pursue the sounds further were thwarted by dense undergrowth and an inexplicable fog that rolled in, muting sound and obscuring vision. They returned to the manor shaken, their hands trembling, recounting in hushed voices what they had seen. Inside the manor, the sense of danger intensified. Doors slammed without wind, windows rattled though the air was still, and an oppressive heaviness hung in every room. Eleanor Harrow began to refuse sleep, wandering the halls at night while whispering to herself, her movements deliberate but erratic. William Harrow followed suit, pacing in silence, his shadow elongated and distorted by candlelight, eyes darting toward corners and doorways. The children, once lively and curious, became withdrawn, speaking in whispers and recoiling from even minor sounds. Observers from neighboring properties remarked on the family's growing isolation, describing the manor as a vessel of fear, a place where ordinary life had been replaced by a quiet, suffocating terror. On a particularly oppressive evening, the final incidents occurred before the family vanished. One of the older children reportedly saw a figure at the top of the stairs, impossibly still, staring directly at them with eyes that seemed to absorb light. The child froze, unable to move or scream, and later recounted the experience as if trapped in a waking nightmare. Servants attempted to follow, but the figure vanished, leaving only the sound of soft, deliberate footsteps retreating into the darkness. Shortly afterward, neighbors observed smoke rising faintly from the chimneys, though when approached, the estate was empty. No signs of fire or human activity, only the lingering scent of ash. By dawn, the Harrow family had completely disappeared. Furniture remained in place, meals untouched, personal belongings scattered in strange configurations, and the estate exuded an atmosphere of unnatural stillness. Search parties combed the property and surrounding woods, but no trace of the family was found. The only witnesses were the servants, who reported ongoing feelings of being watched, subtle noises, and fleeting glimpses of movement in empty rooms long after the disappearance. The estate became a ghostly monument to inexplicable events, a place where every room, corridor, and window carried the memory of fear, anticipation, and loss. The incidents leading up to the disappearance created a pattern of escalating unease, a combination of observable anomalies, psychological pressure, and environmental factors that intertwined to produce a terrifying reality for those who lived through it. The estate, once a symbol of control and order, became a vessel for uncertainty, leaving the surrounding community in a state of collective fascination and dread. Even decades later, the story of the Harrow estate would be recounted as a chilling testament to human vulnerability, the power of fear, and the mysteries that persist when evidence and reason fall short. When news of the Harrow family's disappearance spread beyond the estate, the reaction among neighbors and the wider community was a mixture of fear, disbelief, and morbid fascination. Local townspeople, who had long been aware of the family's prominence and the rigid hierarchy of the plantation, struggled to reconcile the apparent normalcy of the estate with the absolute absence of its inhabitants. Rumors proliferated almost immediately, carried by itinerant workers, travelers, and those who had visited the manor in the days leading up to the event. Some speculated that the family had been forcibly removed by rival landowners or escaped as part of an elaborate scheme, though such theories lacked supporting evidence. Others suggested that supernatural forces had intervened, pointing to the strange sounds, shadows, and movements that were reported prior to the disappearance. The manor had become a locus of speculation and dread, a physical symbol of human fear and uncertainty in the mid-19th century Virginia landscape. Local newspapers seized upon the story, publishing accounts that blended fact, hearsay, and speculation. Articles described the abandoned estate in evocative, unsettling terms, emphasizing the meticulous order of the manor juxtaposed with the absence of the Harrows. Headlines warned of mysterious occurrences, missing families, and unexplained phenomena, feeding both curiosity and anxiety among readers. For many in the surrounding region, these reports confirmed their worst suspicions, that the plantation, despite its outward appearance of stability and control, harbored forces beyond comprehension, whether human or supernatural. Public interest intensified as the story circulated, drawing visitors from neighboring towns, some seeking adventure, others hoping to witness the unexplained firsthand. The clergy, too, weighed in on the events, though their interpretations varied widely. Some pastors viewed the disappearance as divine punishment, a moral lesson for the excesses, pride, and cruelty associated with slave-holding households. Sermons emphasized accountability, obedience, and the consequences of transgressing moral law, linking the Harrow family's vanishing to broader social and spiritual imperatives. Others approached the situation with caution, advocating for calm reflection and investigation rather than hasty judgment. Yet their influence was limited by the pervasive fear and the sensationalism propagated by media and word-of-mouth accounts. Religious interpretation intersected with social norms, magnifying the sense of dread and providing a framework through which the community attempted to understand the inexplicable law. Enforcement and local officials faced considerable challenges in responding to the disappearance. Investigators, constrained by the rudimentary tools and techniques of the era, could not uncover evidence of abduction, foul play, or natural disaster. Reports from officers and search parties noted only the eerie stillness of the manor, the absence of footprints or tracks, and the disordered yet stationary objects within the household. Despite their efforts, no leads emerged, and the community's trust in institutional authority was tested. For many residents, the inability of officials to solve the case reinforced the perception that the disappearance was both extraordinary and inevitable, a gap in human understanding that could not be bridged by law or logic. The family's slaves and domestic workers experienced profound psychological impacts, their testimonies reflecting trauma, fear, and confusion. Many reported lingering feelings of being watched, noises and movements in empty rooms, and encounters with figures that seemed to vanish when approached. While some accounts were dismissed as imagination or exaggeration, historians and psychologists analyzing the records later noted that such experiences are common under extreme stress, social isolation, and in contexts where power and threat are unevenly distributed. The emotional toll on these individuals was compounded by the loss of employment, uncertainty about their future, and the social instability caused by the sudden absence of the estate's leadership. Neighbors reflected on the Harrow family's disappearance with a mix of caution and fascination. Conversations in markets, at church, and in homes often turned to speculation, recounting strange occurrences, subtle warnings, and the psychological atmosphere surrounding the estate. Observers described the Harrow Manor as a place haunted by fear, where shadows seemed to linger longer than natural law allowed, where the ordinary rhythm of life was suspended, and where human presence was simultaneously palpable and absent. Scholars examining the period note that these reactions are consistent with historical patterns in communities confronted with unexplained events. Fear, rumor, and social commentary become intertwined, creating a collective narrative that extends the influence of the event far beyond its temporal and physical boundaries. Scientific and psychological interpretations, though limited in the 1840s, began to emerge in some circles. Local physicians speculated that extreme stress, family discord, or mental illness could account for unusual behaviors observed in the days preceding the disappearance. While contemporary medical understanding was rudimentary, these analyses represented an early attempt to contextualize extraordinary events within observable human phenomena rather than supernatural causation. Psychologists and historians today consider such speculation significant, as it highlights the interplay between societal norms, isolation, and human behavior in extreme situations, providing a framework for understanding why the disappearance resonated so powerfully with the community. By the time the story of the Harrows had fully permeated regional consciousness, the estate had taken on symbolic meaning. It was no longer just a plantation. It had become a cautionary tale about the fragility of order, the unpredictable consequences of secrecy, and the tension between social expectation and human behavior. Community memory, reinforced by newspapers, oral storytelling, and clergy interpretations, transformed the disappearance into a narrative that straddled history and folklore. The estate itself became an enduring emblem, a physical reminder of fear, absence, and unresolved mystery, influencing not only immediate neighbors but also generations who heard the tale retold with a mix of awe and trepidation. Even decades later, the Harrow Manor continued to evoke unease. Visitors described a sense of weight in the air, rooms that seemed to remember past events, and an inexplicable feeling of being observed. Local historians noted that while tangible evidence had long disappeared, the story's impact persisted in the collective psyche, shaping perceptions of risk, morality, and the supernatural. The disappearance had become both historical record and cautionary allegory, reflecting broader themes of human vulnerability, social structure, and the limits of comprehension. The culmination of events at the Harrow estate unfolded under a sky heavy with thunder and shadow, as if the heavens themselves conspired to amplify the tension within the manor. Days of subtle unease and creeping dread had transformed into an oppressive atmosphere that pressed against the bones of those who remained on or near the property. Windows rattled with a wind that could not be felt. Doors seemed to shift slightly in their frames without touch, and the low hum that had haunted the hallways grew louder, resonating in the chest as though the house itself had become a living entity, aware of its occupants and their mounting terror. The servants, already strained by fear, began to whisper of impossible sights, figures in the corner of their vision that vanished when confronted, shadows that moved independently of light, and cold spots that lingered even in the warmth of the summer day. On the evening the family vanished, Eleanor Harrow walked the halls with deliberate steps, her fingers brushing over the polished wood of banisters and door frames as if seeking reassurance from the material solidity of the estate. William followed, his movements slower, more cautious, a hand resting occasionally on a wall as though bracing against an unseen force. The children, pale and silent, clung to corners or doorways, their eyes wide and darting toward spaces that seemed to breathe with life. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the sudden rustle of fabric, the faint sigh of air moving through open windows, was amplified into a threat, each moment stretching interminably, creating a landscape of tension in which ordinary reality felt suspended. Then came the incidents that would forever mark the estate in the memory of the community. A series of loud crashes erupted simultaneously in multiple parts of the manor, as if unseen hands had overturned furniture and slammed doors in every room. The youngest child screamed, a sound raw with terror, and the echo seemed to hang unnaturally in the hallways, multiplying and distorting until it became almost unrecognizable. The servants fled to the doorways, their eyes fixed on the corners of rooms where shadows deepened inexplicably. A chandelier swung violently despite the absence of wind, casting erratic light that made faces flicker in the gloom, some familiar, others grotesque and unidentifiable. Outside, the estate reflected the turmoil within. The garden, usually orderly, seemed to writhe in the wind, branches twisting unnaturally as if moved by invisible hands. Horses and livestock stamped in place, frightened by something they could not see, while the woods bordering the property appeared darker, almost sentient, as if absorbing the escalating energy of the manor. Neighbors who dared approach described a low, pervasive hum, a vibration in the earth that was felt rather than heard, causing unease and physical discomfort. Some claimed to see figures through the windows, faces pressed against glass, staring outward with expressionless eyes that seemed to pierce the soul. As night deepened, the supernatural intensity of the events escalated. Candles extinguished inexplicably, plunging rooms into darkness that seemed heavier than natural shadow. A figure, perhaps William or Eleanor, was glimpsed moving through the hallways, yet attempts to approach were met with sudden disappearance. Whispers, unintelligible yet urgent, filled the air, and the smell of smoke and iron intensified, searing the senses of all who were present. Panic overtook the servants, who huddled together in a corner, trembling as if their bodies were too small to contain the weight of what was happening. The children remained frozen, wide-eyed and silent, eyes fixed on the far wall, where a shadow moved with deliberate intent, dissolving and reappearing, almost teasing the perception of those who watched. In the climactic hours, the manor became a stage of impossibility. Doors closed of their own accord, a heavy trunk moved across the floor as if carried by unseen arms, and the air thickened to the point where breathing felt labored. Eleanor's voice, once calm and measured, rose in urgent, frightened murmurs, and William's authority dissolved into cautious whispers. The final moments were marked by an unbroken silence punctuated only by the creaking of the house and the faint hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Outside observers, peering from the tree line, reported an unnatural glow from the windows and fleeting glimpses of movement that defied explanation. When morning arrived, the estate appeared undisturbed to the casual glance, yet every object, every piece of furniture, and every surface bore the memory of the night's horrors. By sunrise, the Harrow family had disappeared completely. No trace of struggle, no signs of abduction, and no clues as to their fate remained. Items left behind were arranged with subtle irregularity, meals remained untouched, and the manor exuded a silence that pressed on the mind. The estate became a ghostly monument to fear, a place where natural law seemed suspended, and where every visitor felt the imprint of events they could neither fully comprehend nor articulate. Those who ventured near afterward spoke of lingering dread, an almost tangible presence, and the sense that the house itself retained the memory of what had occurred. The climax of the Harrow estate story left the community in a state of collective unease. Witnesses struggled to recount events accurately, and rumors swirled unchecked, blending fragments of reality with conjecture, fear, and folklore. The incident challenged contemporary understanding of human behavior, social order, and the boundaries between the natural and the unknown. Scholars in later years would examine the case as an intersection of psychological tension, environmental factors, and cultural pressures. Yet even with modern analysis, the precise nature of the disappearance remained elusive. The manor, now empty, stood as a testament to the power of fear and the vulnerability of the human mind when confronted with forces it cannot rationalize. Its walls, hallways, and empty rooms retained the echoes of the climactic night, preserving a narrative that was both historical and spectral. For the surrounding community, the climax of the Harrow mystery was not only an event to recount, but a permanent marker of human limitation, a chilling reminder of how quickly order could dissolve, how subtly terror could infiltrate daily life, and how some questions remain unanswered, haunting memory across generations. Decades passed, yet the Harrow estate remained etched in the collective consciousness of the region, a haunting emblem of inexplicable disappearance and lingering fear. The house, once the site of meticulously ordered life, became a place approached with caution, its doors and windows boarded or left ajar, as if waiting to reveal the secrets of the night the family vanished. Travelers in later generations spoke of the eerie stillness that clung to the estate, of shadows that moved where no figure could be present, and of a palpable sense that the house itself remembered. The story of the Harrows transformed from immediate news into legend, retold with subtle variations by descendants of neighbors, historians, and local storytellers, each iteration adding layers of tension, speculation, and unease. Some argued that the family had met a natural yet unrecorded tragedy, perhaps wandering into the woods during a storm, overcome by elements or wild animals. Others proposed more sinister scenarios, that the family had been victims of deliberate violence, abducted by rivals, or that an internal collapse of psychological stability led them to vanish collectively. The most enduring narratives, however, suggested that the estate itself was somehow complicit, a focal point for forces beyond human comprehension, absorbing its occupants into the very fabric of its walls and grounds. Accounts of moving shadows, cold drafts in warm rooms, and soft footsteps that faded when pursued persisted long after the initial disappearance, cementing the manor's reputation as a locus of mystery and terror. Historians examining contemporary records noted that the Harrow family's disappearance reflected broader societal tensions. The pressures of social hierarchy, the isolation inherent to large plantations, and the psychological strain of maintaining appearances in a morally complex system likely contributed to behaviors that remain impossible to reconstruct fully. Additionally, the reliance on oral testimony, newspapers that amplified speculation, and the natural human inclination towards storytelling in the absence of complete evidence ensured that the narrative would gain a life of its own. The combination of documented events, plausible human responses, and myth-making created a story that bridged historical reality and the supernatural imagination, leaving future generations to ponder the unknowable. The estate itself, overgrown with weeds and reclaimed gradually by the surrounding forest, stood as a silent witness. Visitors reported lingering dread, shadows that seemed to watch, and a sense of presence that refused to dissipate. Scholars and local historians debated whether the phenomena described were products of memory, environmental factors, or genuine anomalies, yet no definitive answer could be reached. The house in its empty state became a mirror reflecting the fears, anxieties, and imagination of those who approached it, offering a chilling lesson in the fragility of human perception and the persistence of mystery. Psychologically, the Harrow story offers insight into the human response to the inexplicable. Communities tend to weave narrative structures around uncertainty, filling gaps with interpretation that often blends fear, morality, and social norms. The Harrow disappearance exemplified this process, combining isolation, familial secrecy, and unexplained events into a compelling, almost ritualized tale of warning. Descendants of neighboring families recounted experiences of unease when near the estate, of inexplicable sounds and of fleeting glimpses of figures, all reinforcing the original story and ensuring its endurance. Each retelling was both reflection and reinforcement, a form of collective memory that deepened the estate's place in local folklore. Speculation about the ultimate fate of the Harrows remains varied. Some suggest they perished in a hidden, unmarked location, leaving behind only the memory of their presence. Others contend that they became absorbed into the landscape of the estate, a merging of human and environment that defies conventional understanding. Scientific explanations remain inconclusive. Environmental hazards, psychological collapse, or unknown natural phenomena may have played a role, yet the simultaneous disappearance of all family members and the subsequent oddities observed on the property challenge straightforward conclusions. The uncertainty ensures that the story continues to captivate, frighten, and provoke reflection. In the final analysis, The Harrow estate embodies both historical record and spectral narrative. It is a cautionary illustration of human vulnerability, the limits of control, and the ways in which fear shapes perception and memory. The unresolved nature of the disappearance ensures that the estate is not merely an abandoned property, but a vessel for contemplation about mortality, isolation, and the unknown. Its legacy endures as a chilling reminder of how ordinary life can be interrupted by forces, whether natural, psychological, or mysterious, that remain beyond comprehension. The story of the Harrows concludes not with resolution but with reflection, leaving the audience to consider the fragility of family, the weight of social and environmental pressures, and the persistent enigma of the unknown. The estate continues to whisper in the imagination, a monument to absence, a testament to fear, and a narrative that challenges the boundary between documented history and the enduring power of mystery. The Harrow family may have vanished from sight, yet they remain present in memory, echoing in the quiet spaces of those who encounter the story, ensuring that the dark history of Virginia in 1848 retains its haunting resonance for generations to come.